Now from WATN, it's Local 24 This Week with Richard Ransom.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to Local 24 This Week. Every Sunday at 9 a.m. and 10:35 p.m. we're here to bring you the real story behind the big stories. We want to give the week's headlines some context and perspective, and I have just the panel to do that today. Before we make introductions, here are our topics for tonight. 4 days and counting. The Memphis municipal election is just 4 days away. We had some excitement in one of the city council races. One candidate charged with aggravated assault. And a county commissioner says if city voters pass the referendum to raise the city sales tax, well, he thinks Shelby County should get half the money. Some statewide races to talk about as well. In Mississippi, they're just a month away from electing a new governor. And in the contest to fill Lamar Alexander's U.S. Senate seat, one of the Republicans in that race is already out with his first campaign ad. And we'll talk about the interesting response in federal court by the city of South Haven. It's being sued by the family of illegal immigrant Ishmael Lopez, who was mistakenly shot by police 2 years ago. Now South Haven says it can't be held liable because Lopez had no constitutional rights. All right, we'll get to all that in a moment, but first let me introduce the roundtable today. Local 24's Mike Matthews is here. Linda Moore making her debut appearance on the program with the Daily Memphian, and Otis Sanford, Local 24's political analyst and commentator. I'm anxious to talk to you all about the mayor's race and the other races too, but let's give us the scorecard right now on the mayor's race as you see it. Otis, you first.
Well, I see it the same way I've seen it for several weeks and several months here. I think it's still Jim Strickland's race to lose. I think he is on the downward trend here as the early voting is ended. And I don't see anything that will be an upset here. Some news came out late last week that could have been used against him, but I don't see the candidates doing it, and that's the poverty rate. The new figures came out, and Memphis's poverty rate went up to almost 28%, and that's the highest it's been since 2013. And of course, Mayor Strickland has been talking about Memphis has momentum. Well, the momentum is not there for a lot of people. The poverty rate is going up, but I don't see any of his opponents making any hay out of this. He has the money. He's on television and radio. He's all over the place taking credit for things like Union Row. I just don't see anything that will be an upset in this race.
How about you, Linda? Handicap it. How does it look from your perspective?
Well, I think Otis is right that Mayor Strickland is not really going to be challenged by any of the other candidates in the race. I think what will be interesting, though, is to see who comes in 2 and 3. Obviously, Commissioner Sawyer, I believe her whole goal in running was to force Mayor Strickland to address some issues that he may not have looked at when in his campaign about being good at the basics. And so I don't know if she actually thought she win. Obviously, nobody runs for office and doesn't want to win, but I think her goal was as much to push Mayor Strickland to talk about some things that he might not have addressed. And then we have Dr. Harrington, who wants us to return to the time when he was leading the city. So I think that that's going to be the real interesting component of the mayor's race, not so much who wins, but who comes in second and third and what those margins are.
Well, assuming you're right, go ahead with number 2 and 3.
That's an interesting point. I like that.
You know, why haven't the other candidates, Willie Harrington, the challengers, Tammy Sawyer, gotten out there more? Of course they can't compete when it comes to a campaign war chest. Strickland has all the money he could possibly want and is spending most of it. But there is free media too. There are opportunities, like you said, to have a news conference when the poverty statistics come out or whatever the case might be. It just seems they were both just content to stay home.
Strategy. This is what they're going to tell you. It's all their strategy, right? Willie Harrington, former Mayor Harrington, has said all along that he doesn't want to deal with the media because he can't find any reporter who's fair. Yeah, sounds an awful lot like what you see at the White House.
I was going to say.
So he wants to stay away from that. Tammy Sawyer's campaign has stayed away from free media since day one, and I do not understand that at all. There have been a few interviews here and there, and those interviews are many of the voters, at least who have come up to me, said they were shocked by that because they said, I didn't know that's how she stood on issues. Instead, of course, what she gets the press on is her tweets. Deservedly so in some cases. If you're going to care about the people, don't start talking about laughing when a lady is crying because her dog was just put down. You can't do that. It's just not going to happen, okay? So, no, I mean, that's There's been no issues. There have been no campaign debates. There's been nothing on the issues.
Yeah.
Not at all.
And to Linda's point, I mean, you make a good point about who's going to come in second or third here. And if Tammy Sawyer was looking to perhaps create a strong challenge here to Strickland and maybe come in second, that would put her in a position for a future race, because she's only 37 years old. That would have been good strategy, but as Mike says, these tweets came out a couple of weeks ago, and that has hurt her campaign, and the question is it going to hurt her into the future? I don't know the answer to that, because they were pretty devastating tweets. So it'll be interesting to see now if she does come in second.
Speculation, is her county commission seat even safe at this point in light of what has been said, but we'll see. I want to move on to the city council races. Any of those excite you? I did mention or allude to District 7 candidate Thurston Smith, I should say, who was arrested for aggravated assault, some sort of money dispute with a poll worker of all people, but nonetheless, I don't know how much of a factor he was in that race. I think it's the most crowded of all the city council races. Yeah. But what are you watching as you look at city council?
I think that District 7 race is the most interesting one. People came out very early wanting to send Councilman Berlin Boyd home. And so that was one of the first races where you saw someone challenging an incumbent city council person. So I think that'll be the really interesting race to see the results of.
And let's not forget, in those single district races, there's a runoff,
yes.
So that factors into it.
This city has an amazing ability of beating the will to vote right out of the average voter. If you wonder why the voting turnout is so low, I think this is one of the reasons why. You have the incumbents in there right now, and a lot of people don't like the incumbents, but those running for the incumbents have a tendency to pull a gun on people, and a poll worker, for example, and things like that. So what you're getting is even worse in some ways than the incumbent that you might not like. It happens, and it happens far too frequently here. We always hear about one thing or another thing concerning the people who are running for election here. I don't think this is going to see any great changes in the city council. It wouldn't surprise me for Berlin Boyd to go back in there and all that, and Ed Ford Sr. to go back, so we have a little taste of, days
city
gone by.
Past.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so.
Yeah. I think the other challenge with voting in the city council elections is you vote for 4 people. You vote in a super district, you have 3 seats in a super district,
right.
Then you have
your single district.
Your single district. So when you got a crowded field with incumbents, with newcomers, that's a lot of research to ask the average voter.
Who's got other things to worry about.
Right.
Exactly.
And I do agree that District 7 race is, to me, the most interesting in terms of how it will eventually end up. I don't think Berlin Boyd, at this point, is going to get over 50%, which means there will be a runoff there. I noticed the Commercial Appeal did not endorse him the other day. So it'll be interesting to see how people mount a real serious challenge against him.
I hate to break it to you two guys, but I mean, the Commercial Appeal's endorsement is not worth a quarter to get it, it's not anymore. Not anymore. It wasn't.
I'm not sure whether it was.
I've never gone by using even I've worked in newspapers my entire life, and I don't know who the newspaper endorses.
I'm not supposed to care. You were reporting.
We're running along on the segment, but I do want to quickly address the issue that was brought up by County Commissioner Edmund Ford Jr. today, or this week, in which he said, look, if that city council sales tax referendum does pass, and they raise the sales tax in Memphis by 0.5% to 9 3/4, that the Shelby County government should get half of the revenues, which would be, what, about $27 million?
That's right.
25.
He says he's basing that on state law. What do we think about the kerfuffle he's raising with that?
I think that's another effort he's trying to make. He wrote an op-ed piece for the Daily Memphian. He co-authored it with Councilman Kemp Conrad, and they are very much against this referendum. Also, you have to note that nobody in the city council supported it, which is why the police department and the fire department unions had to go out and actually get folks to sign the petition to get it on the ballot. So I think this is another way that Commissioner Ford is looking at it, to say, well, look, even if they get this, we may, come up the works by trying to make sure that they don't get all the money they are hoping to get.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was political strategy on his part. He's clearly not in favor of it. He came on Local 24 this week, said he was not in favor of it. So I think this is just another political move here more than anything else.
Raise your hand if you think the sales tax referendum is going to pass. Really?
Really?
Okay.
Really?
Why?
I think the average voter out there can see past what I think is purely a personal issue here between Kim Conrad and Ed Ford Jr. They've never liked the police unions. They've never had their problems with Mike Williams. I think people out there realize, for safety's sake, and seeing the fact that you can hire 450 officers, but you only have a gain of what?
28
or so. You need something to keep them on the job, and that's why
I'm not seeing
People have rejected many a sales tax
They really have.
before.
Yeah.
The penny on the gas.
Sure, and they did it for education too.
pre-K
Yeah,
in both city
Yeah.
and county.
I think this is different.
All right, we will find out soon enough. All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to look at two statewide races when we come back, the Mississippi governor's race as well as the U.S. Senate race in Tennessee right after this.
Memphis has come a long way since I ran for mayor 4 years ago. 20,000 more jobs, billions in new development, and businesses and jobs are moving back into our core city. Last year, we saw record tourism, and shows like Bluff City Law are showcasing Memphis on a national stage. We still have a lot more work to do, but we've made real progress, and this is no time to turn back. I'm asking for your vote. Together, we can keep Memphis moving forward.
The National Civil Rights Museum presents the 28th Freedom Award, honoring Gloria Steinem, Hafsat Abiola, and John Legend. Wednesday, October 30th. The pre-show gala starts at 5 p.m. at the Halloran Center. The award ceremony is at 7:30 at the Orpheum Theater. The ceremony includes a tribute to the Green Book, and the host is Lamont Rucker. For ticket information, visit freedomaward.org.
Everyone who has ever lived has lived here. All of mankind's triumphs and failures. Every moment, every hometown, all here. We start our coverage on the ground and take it to the airwaves, so you always know what's happening in your own world and beyond. We are free TV and radio. We are breaking news. We are always there. We are broadcasters.
Small businesses drive our nation's economy, employing about half of the country's private sector workforce.
Here's coffee.
Thanks so much.
When you shop at local small businesses, you help the entire community thrive.
Hello, I'm Congressman David Custall. Small businesses unite our community and they bolster our local economy. Shop local and help spur innovation and job creation in West Tennessee.
Brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
You're watching Local 24 This Week with Richard Ransom.
All right, back now to talk about two statewide races. Let's talk about the Mississippi governor's race first. So Jim Hood, the Attorney General, and Tate Reeves, the Lieutenant Governor. Most see Reeves as the odds-on favorite to win this. Democrats don't win very many statewide offices anymore in Mississippi. But Jim Hood does have an ad out where he's talking about, it's not about politics, it's about what I'm going to do for health care. We know that issue really resonates with Mississippians, especially because they've suffered so much, especially in rural areas. Do you think that will persuade some folks?
Well, I think it has a possibility. If anything, it's the one issue that he has to go after, because health care is a big issue, especially among Democrats and independents, not just in Mississippi, but other places. So it's smart of him to really focus on that and hope to draw some voters, while at the same time, he has to hope that there's some implosion going on among Republicans based on what's going on in Washington right now. That, to me, is Jim Hood's only hope of winning this election. He has to connect on some issue. Health care has to be that issue.
Anyone disagree?
No, not at all.
Okay.
You know, I'll tell you one thing he wants. He wants to make sure that all Mississippians are hydrated properly. If you've seen that ad where he takes the water out of his pickup truck. We have pickup trucks in this race. We had pickup trucks with Lamar Alexander.
Yes, we
if
like
a pickup
trucks.
truck can win, there you go in this case. But that's about what he's got.
Well, Otis brought up what's going on in Washington and potential impact on other races. Let's show you a campaign ad being run by Bill Hagerty, who's been endorsed by President Trump and is running for U.S. Senate on the Republican side. Don't know what kind of a primary contest to expect there, but this gives you an idea when you watch this ad here for Bill Hagerty.
The socialists in Washington are trying to impeach our president. Bill Hagerty is the only conservative who has Trump's back.
I'm Bill Hagerty. I'm proud to be endorsed by President Trump. Together, we'll keep America great.
So he's all in, and when you see the developments in this story, I don't know, even some diehard Republicans that I'm in communication with are starting to waffle a little bit. What do you think, if there's any risk at all in taking this strategy?
No.
No.
I don't believe there is. I think Mississippi is red enough.
Well, he's Tennessee, obviously.
Bill Hagerty. Well,
Tennessee's pretty red, too.
Red enough. Tennessee is definitely red enough that what it'll do is it'll flush out his hardcore supporters. I mean, there are Trump people who are hardcore Trump or die. They'll ride or die for the president and anyone who's associated with him.
Now, Manny Sethi, the doctor from Nashville, is the other Republican so far who's declared, and actually declared before Hagerty did. And he's an interesting candidate because he may not be financed as well as Hagerty, but he has a good war chest, and he's also hired Governor Bill Lee's campaign advisors and staff, or many of them, to help him with his campaign, kind of running that outsider model. Do you think that he has any leg up as we get closer and closer to election and as developments warrant with the president? Mike?
No, I don't think he does. I think that the Trump is still so strong in this state, so strong in this region, supporting him. No matter, again, he can be the Teflon Don, so to speak, because no matter what he does, the voters in this state support him. No, I don't think you can, you know, I think Bill Hagerty is the guy.
All right, Otis,
I'm going to take a little contrarian view here.
Okay, it's about time.
Because we're not talking about an election that's this November. If this election were in November of 2019, I would agree with everything that you two have said, because there would not be enough time to sort of flip people in Tennessee. But we're talking about an election, the primary election is in August of 2020. A lot can happen on the national level between now and August. You see how things are going at warp speed right now with this with this impeachment process, and if it definitely comes out that there is really some obstruction of justice, abuse of power, people come forward and he is impeached, even if he doesn't get convicted, I'm not so sure that Tennesseans who have voted for Democrats in the governor's race, maybe not in the Senate, I'm not convinced that that won't happen. I'm not saying it will, I'm just not convinced.
But see, I just wonder, because a lot of the Tennessee Republicans are President Trump's base. And even if he is impeached, they will not necessarily believe that his impeachment was just or honest or legal. So
But Lamar Alexander is not. Lamar Alexander is not the senator from South Carolina who can see no wrong, and he's not David Kustoff. Lamar Alexander is taking a wait-and-see approach on this, and Lamar Alexander still has some sway here. We'll see what happens.
In fact, this week he
Alexander also is not running for office.
Well, I know.
True. But he did rebuff Trump this week on the issue of how he's financing the border wall, taking money from schools, on the military schools. So it'll be interesting to see.
And I don't see Lamar Alexander standing at the wall, rifle in hand, saying, I'm up and I'm going to save the country.
You don't?
Donald Trump. No, he's not doing that. Lamar Alexander will do it just like he's done on everything else in his career in the Senate. He won't make a stand on anything.
All I'm saying is that we are a long way from a Republican primary for Senate in the state, and a lot can happen between now and August of 2020. We'll just have to wait and see on that.
All right.
All right, we're going to let it go there. When we come back, we're going to talk about the other big story this week, and that is South Haven's response to the federal lawsuit against it over the mistaken police shooting of Ishmael Lopez 2 years ago. It's still an issue that is front and center today, and we'll talk about it right after this.
You're watching Local 24 This Week with Richard Ransom.
Big story with Mid-South Impact. In fact, it's got some national headlines this week in the Washington Post on Friday concerning the city of South Haven's response to the federal lawsuit against it by the family of Ishmael Lopez. The city arguing really they don't need to be held liable for the mistaken shooting by their police of Lopez because he's an illegal immigrant and he doesn't have the constitutional rights as those of us who are citizens. And Otis, I know you went off on this earlier. We'll give you a chance to say something in a minute, but first, let's hear from the family attorney, Murray Wells.
You take their arguments at face value, they can lock you up and throw away the key because you have no protections, no right to trial. They can kill you. They can use excessive force.
Is that all true?
Well, it certainly seems as it may not be true, but certainly I think South Haven is trying to make it true in this case. I think this is the most atrocious argument that anybody can make. You know, as a proud Mississippi native, they give me more reasons to be ashamed of that every time something big happens here. Basically, what they are saying here is we have a right to kill you. And because you are an illegal immigrant, nobody can do anything about it. I think it was a shameful argument for a lawyer to make in a case like this. You can make an argument that we feared for our lives, the police shot because of that. They shot in self-defense, or he had a gun, we thought he had a gun. But don't come in there and say, we have a right to kill you because you're not a U.S. citizen. That's not what the Constitution says. That's not what the Supreme Court has ruled that the Constitution is for.
As far as we're aware, at least since immigration really rose to become front and center, we haven't had a local government or a state government try to make this kind of argument.
Well, I guess what's interesting about this argument is that we've already established that people who are not citizens of the country have rights. They have a right to the same protections as everything else. They have a right to due process. Mm-hmm. We've seen terrorists, people accused of terrorism, you know, get lawyers and get you know, Miranda rights and everything else that every other citizen gets. So I think this is an interesting position to take. I don't know what case law they based it on, but it'll be.
And this is a federal case, Mike. I would think that might be harder to sway than if it were a state case. Yes?
I don't know. Under this Department of Justice, under this current administration, who has truly poisoned the well with many Americans when it comes to illegal aliens, I don't know. I mean, he certainly tapped into something there with people who are just feeling like these folks don't deserve anything. They don't deserve basic constitutional rights, as we've all thought they did for years and years. They should just be pushed back out of the country, and if something like this happens and they get killed, well, it's the way it goes. You shouldn't have come over here to begin with. I mean, honestly, it boils down to something like that.
But they can paint my house and they can mow my lawn.
That's right.
Or work at my casino, or work at my hotel.
And don't forget your processing plant.
Meat processing.
Mississippi processing plant.
Linda made a point about what case law they were looking at. Well, one case law that they cited had to do with someone who was arrested and detained actually in Mexico.
Yes.
It was not in this country. So that's apples and oranges here. I still say that, you know, as I said the other day, Richard, at best this is a bad look, but at worst this is outright bigotry and racism.
Yeah, if you want to understand folks in Mississippi, if you want to get an idea of why people in the other 49 states sometimes give you an evil eye and give you the stink eye when it comes down to what your beliefs are, this right here is an example. This right here is an example. This is an outrageous thing. If they did this in any other state, well, they wouldn't even try it in many other states in the union, but I'll bet you some are watching this case just to see what happens.
All right, I think I agree with that. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back to wrap things up right after this.
Victory Auto, your buy here, pay here pros with over 30 years of experience to get you in a car today. Victory Auto has over 200 vehicles in inventory, and we will help you find the car that fits your needs and budget, no matter your credit score. Our staff will locate a car, truck, or SUV tailored to you with average monthly payments under $300 with affordable in-house financing. When the bank says no, Victory Auto says yes. Just drive your mouse to victoryauto.org, find a car, and apply for credit. It's that easy. Victory Auto, your buy here, pay here pros.
People often ask me, how much money do I have to pay you up front to be my personal lawyer? The answer is nothing. It's free unless we win. What about a slip and fall or car crash case? Free unless we win. We have recovered billions in settlements and verdicts over the years. We have never taken a fee unless we've won the case. Our service is free unless we recover for you. You can hire the largest personal injury law firm in the world as your personal lawyer for free unless and until we recover for you. Morgan & Morgan, forthepeople.com.
Make tomorrow awesome with Xfinity. Call 1-800-800-5611 today. And do what you love online with Xfinity Internet for only $30 a month for 12 months. Xfinity delivers the internet speed you need to surf, stream, and download. Plus, with Norton Security Online, your family will get advanced online protection, and it's included at no additional cost. Call 1-800-800-5611 today. and get speed, security, and value from Xfinity for an amazing price. Xfinity delivers reliably fast internet speed and the best in-home Wi-Fi experience. Get started with Xfinity Internet for just $30 a month for 12 months. It's all backed by our 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's risk-free. Experience speed at a great low price from Xfinity. Call 1-800-800-5611. That's 1-800-800-5611. Xfinity, the future of awesome.
Before we go, if you are a Memphis resident and you didn't early vote, we certainly encourage you to go out and do so on Thursday. We'll be having a live election coverage all night here on Local 24 News. Otis, we've been talking about the early voting numbers. They were riding pretty low most of the period, but then they caught up some near the end. What do you think of the turnout's going to be on Thursday?
Well, I think it's probably now is going to rival 2015, depending on what happens on Thursday, because the early voting did basically catch up. Obviously, as we tape this, we don't know what happened on Saturday. But if there's hefty voting on that last day, it'll catch up. It'll be close to 28, maybe even 30% this time, which is very surprising to me.
But we also know, based on what we know so far, that most of those who are showing up are over the age of 50.
Yes.
Who does that help?
Well, we know who that helps, the incumbent.
When Commissioner Sawyer announced her candidacy, one of the first things I thought was that her challenge would be getting her demographic to go vote. You know, middle-aged people, older folks, or all younger voters. Yeah, and her tribe's not out there. That won't help her.
Mike?
Well, the bottom line is, you know, that I think we're going to get, I don't think we're going to have record numbers here. I think the people who want to vote have voted in early voting already. And I know that was former Mayor Harrington's strategy, was to look at the early vote, run for the early vote. That's going to be what makes or breaks them. We'll see how that turns out.
Well, thanks all three of you for being here today. We appreciate it. Otis, Linda, and Mike. And to you at home, we appreciate you as well. You can email me at rransom@localmemphis.com, rransom@localmemphis.com. We'll see you next week for Local 24 This Week.